flowing?
I don't remember that it was necessarily Monday, but I do remember that happened at some point, yes.
Do you remember shredding documents during the lunch hour on the 22nd when the representatives of the Attorney General's office had left for their lunch?
I remember shredding documents while they were in there reading documents.
You're shredding them in their presence?
Well, I mean, they were sitting in my office, and the shredder was right outside, and I walked out and shredded documents.
More than a few pieces of paper, right?
Pardon?
It'll be more than a few pieces of paper.
Well, that's a pretty high-speed shredder. It eats them pretty quick. And I'm not trying to be light about it, but I mean, they were sitting in my office reading, and I'd finish a document and say, we don't need that anymore. I'd walk up, and I'd go out and shred it. They could hear it. The shredder was right outside the door.
Well, I'm not trying to be light about it either, but that you would go up there and take documents that they had finished reading?
No. I want to be very clear. They were sitting, I had my office, and you've now had a diagram of this palatial basement office on the 3rd floor of the old EOB. It was up on the wall here somewhere. And the desk that I had was in the corner of my office, and then there was a table about this size, and on that table was laid out all of the Iran documents. And I was working at my desk on other things, literally cleaning up files on lots of things. And when I'd finish with a handful of documents, I'd walk up, walk past them, walk out the door, you know where the shredder was, turn the corner, turn on the shredder, and drop them in.
And did anyone say to you, Colonel, what are you doing?
No, and I didn't think anything of it either. I mean, you know, what you got to understand, Counsel, is that I didn't think I'd done anything wrong.
Well, I understand.
Okay, and I don't think that they necessarily thought that I had done anything wrong. And so an officer who's got a shredder in his office ought to be, if he's not on the telephone or reading or writing documents and needs to get rid of them, puts them in the shredder.
The record is that before lunch hour, Mr. Reynolds found the diversion document.
But he didn't tell me.
I know he didn't tell you, Colonel, so if you wait for the question, you're going to get your opportunity to answer. I'm not interrupting your answers.
Yeah.
Not at all. He found that document. He attached significance to that document. And what you're saying is that even after that, which occurred before lunch, you were there taking batches of documents past these attorneys from the Department of Justice and shredding them, and they weren't saying, stop, we'd like to look, what are you doing, we're concerned, none of that, right?
I'm not trying to leave the wrong impression, Counsel. Okay, what I'm saying to you is, I thought, and perhaps they thought, and I'm trying to be in several people's mind at once, is that they were looking for the facts on what had transpired in September and October, November of 1985. All right? And what I was told they were looking for, I thought was in the files that I gave them. Let me finish. I was also engaged in a number of other projects of national security importance. The fact that I was shredding documents, I don't think would be unusual to them. This was, after all, an office with a shredder in it. I mean, I'm not trying to say that these guys were just letting me willy-nilly go and shred documents. I had a shredder for that purpose. If I'd finished reading a top-secret cable of intelligence value, you don't leave those things sitting around your office. You destroy them after you read them. And that's what I was doing.
Were you taking single documents over to the shredder, or were you taking files over to the shredder?
I was not taking files. I would go through a file. I was sitting at my desk. They were working 10 feet from me. And we would go, they were working on their projects. I was working on mine.
I want to hear more about it. Go ahead.
Well, no,
I'm not interrupting.
I don't think you ought to accuse them of incompetence because they stopped a guy from doing his job. That's why the government of the United States gave me a shredder.
But your job on that day was to get rid of files, wasn't it? That's what you came in for.
No, that isn't what I came in for. I was working desperately, among other things, and I received 2 or 3 phone calls on it to keep the hostages alive. Good grief, we'd had this stuff all over the newspapers. The Israelis were calling me every half hour, and I was working with those people. They heard me taking the phone calls. I was also in the process of looking after several other action packages that I had to move across the street on totally unrelated issues.
Colonel, was your work on the phone with the Israelis leading you to shred documents?
Objection. On occasion.
Weren't you going through your files to get rid of embarrassing documents?
Embarrassing? No. Documents that would compromise the national security of the United States, documents that would put lives at risk, documents that would demonstrate a covert action in the U.S. direction and control and relationship to it, yes. Embarrassing? No. I'm not embarrassed to be here, Counsel.
Are you saying, Colonel, that it would... What? You just keep going with it. Don't you think so? Are you saying, Colonel, that you thought that allowing the Attorney General of the United States or his representatives to see documents would jeopardize lives?
No. What I'm saying to you, Counsel, is that revelations regarding those documents would destroy lives. Many of the documents that I destroyed that day, prior to that day, and after that day, had absolutely no relationship to the Iranian activities. They had to do with Nicaraguan resistance activities. They had to do with counter-terrorist operations. Things that were, just as this committee has, I think, a scope within which they operate, they were looking for specific Iranian associated activities. And thus, if I had a file of matters pertaining to support for the internal opposition in Nicaragua, or people who I had contacted in Europe and with whom I had worked to get weapons for the Nicaraguan resistance, and sitting there at my desk, I would pull those out and look at them and say, North, if you're not here tomorrow, this doesn't need to be found by anybody. I would take them over to the shredder and destroy them. That's what I'm saying. It was beyond the pale of their inquiry.
Colonel, those were files that you had assembled over time, correct?
5.5 years, sir.
And those were files that had remained secure for 5.5 years. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you knew whoever your successor was who would occupy that office would be someone who was selected by the National Security Advisor. Is that correct?
I did not know that the person who moved into that office would share the same responsibilities or indeed have anything to do with the matters in which I had worked. And the documents that existed in the permanent files were all that were necessary to carry on whatever other the activities in which I was engaged, and it was only a part of my work, Counsel, in support of the Nicaraguan resistance and in support of the Iranian initiative, were being terminated. There was no need to retain those documents.